Welcome to episode 99 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing director and screenwriter Trey Nelson, who recently wrote and directed Lost in the Sun, which stars Josh Duhamel. So stay tuned for that interview. This podcast is brought to you by Final Draft. When inspiration strikes, strike back with the Final Draft writing app for iPad and iPhone. Carry your script in your pocket for writing on the go, then easily sync back to your desktop using Dropbox integration. Start your writing career with the industry standard Final Draft. Visit finaldraft.com to learn more. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they are very much appreciated. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 99. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide: how to write a professional logline inquiry letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A quick few words about what I'm working on. I got the audio in place on in my teaser trailer for my crime action thriller project. This is the one I'm planning a Kickstarter for in January. So I also did a rough edit on the part where I talk into the camera and pitch the project. It's just me literally talking into the camera and telling people about the project. The teaser trailer is going to go first. That's about a minute. And then there's about a minute of me talking into the camera, pitching the project, talking about the project. I'm trying to keep it to 2 minutes or less. Right now it's a little over 2 minutes, so I got to cut it down a little bit, but hopefully I'll get it down to about 2 minutes. Last week I did a quick polish on the spoof I wrote in October. I've been talking about this project on the podcast the last few weeks. My guess is I'll have to do a couple more passes on this, but I'd say the lion's share of work is basically done. I spent quite a bit of work trying to get the notes implemented last week, but I think there'll definitely be some more notes, but hopefully they won't be overly difficult to implement. It went over this script. I put the first, let's say, 28 pages up in my writers group a couple of weeks ago. It went over pretty well in the group. So I'm thinking about what else I could write that's similar, just basically another very broad comedy. I actually don't have a spec script like this. That's sort of a very broad, almost spoof comedy. And it was pretty easy to write. I mean, I've talked about this on the podcast. I basically wrote the whole thing from start to finish in about 5 weeks. So it was pretty easy to write, and I think it would be a good spec to have. So I've been going through my idea bank and kind of trying to come up with some ideas for broad comedies, very, very broad, almost spoof comedies. One thing that was interesting and perhaps a little disheartening is the last two projects I put up in my writers group both went over fairly well, and they are both scripts that I didn't spend a lot of time on. I guess there's just no accounting for taste. The amount of time, what's I'd say disheartening is the amount of time I spend writing a project seems to have virtually no correlation to how it is received in the writers group. People sometimes like my stuff, sometimes they think my stuff is garbage, but the amount of time I spend actually writing it does not seem to affect that. As I said, these last two projects I put up, they went over pretty well. The one before this went over pretty well. This one went over, I would say, very well. I mean, people really seem to think this was very funny and a good writing sample. But as I said, I just wrote it very, very quickly. And some of the projects I've put up that I've spent a lot of time really tweaking and rewriting, they've gone over like lead balloons. So I'm not really sure what to make of all of that. One thing that has occurred to me is these last two projects are both ideas that were brought to me by producers. They were writing assignments, so I didn't come up with the idea. I just wrote the script based on their idea. So perhaps I'm not great at coming up with ideas. I mean, this is something that I'm thinking about. I'm kind of looking at these ideas and wondering why these were easy to write and why these ideas went over pretty well in the writers group. neither idea, when I began, did I think either idea was particularly great, but both of them were fairly simple and straightforward, and perhaps my ideas get a little bit too confusing or just too ambitious. I'm not really sure, but this is something I'm thinking about because, as I said, these last two projects went over pretty well compared to my project before that I spent a lot of time with. I would say didn't go over all that well. Anyway, speaking of my writers group, I always like to mention this on the podcast. We meet every Tuesday night at 7:30 in Sherman Oaks. So if you live in LA, we're always looking for good new writers. Check out deadlinejunkies.com. I'll link to it in the show notes. Again, that's deadlinejunkies.com. You can come in and just audit a session for free. Just any Tuesday night you're available, just come out, as I said, 7:30 in Sherman Oaks. Just sit in and listen to one of the sessions and see if you think it might be a good fit for you. And then you can talk to Adam, who's at every meeting, and he's the one that runs it. You just submit a project. If he likes it, he lets you in. And it's really encouraged to come and audit a couple of classes, give notes to the other writers so that he can kind of get a feel for what kind of notes you're going to give, and then he'll read a writing sample, and then you can get in. So if you're in the LA area, even if you're not in the LA area, I highly recommend joining a writers group. It's a great way to workshop your stuff, see if the jokes are working, see if the dialogue is working, see if the structure is working. Just to hear it read by actors is an excellent exercise. Anyway, the other thing I'm working on, which is sort of screenwriting related, it's the selling your screenplay, is I'm putting together another free live webinar. It's called How to Effectively Market Your Screenplay and Sell It. It's the same webinar that I've run a couple of times before, but I'm going to run it again as people seem to really get a lot out of it. People have asked me, why do I run these free webinars? First, I can tell how many people attend them. I've had over 100 people come to the two webinars in the past. The one I think I did it in September, and then I did another one in August. And as I said, both of them had over 100 people, so they seem to be well attended, and that is an indication to me that there's a need for this webinar. There's an interest in the content and the subject matter. Secondly, I also can tell from the feedback that I get. I usually get a lot of emails after the webinar, people just saying, hey, I really appreciate you're doing the webinar. I got a lot out of it. So there's it's gratifying just getting those emails and feeling like you're actually doing something that is having an impact on people. But obviously the main reason I run them is the same reason that I run this podcast. It's a platform to market my screenwriting services. It's called content marketing. You'll see lots of people and companies doing it in this day and age. I try to keep my content low key so I don't bombard people with salesy messaging all the time. Mainly, I'm not a great salesman, so that's part of it. But also, the key to content marketing is to give a lot of value so that people keep consuming your content. Hopefully, that's what I'm doing with this podcast, and hopefully, that's what I'm doing with the webinar. So, the whole idea is you give out a lot of value. People listen to it. They think you have something interesting or smart to say, and then hopefully they come back when they need any of the services that you offer. They come back and they would purchase those services. So, there's no obligation to purchase services. You can listen to this podcast. It's free, but, you'll notice that I am pitching my services, and it's the same thing in the webinar. There's a little bit of pitching in that. Hopefully this isn't a surprise to anyone, like people think that these things are done just out of the goodness of the heart. I mean, everybody has to have some reason for doing something at the end of the day. And selling your screenplay does have paid services. So I'm going to go through just a little bit more about the webinar. I'm going to go through all the various online channels that are available to screenwriters and give you an unfiltered opinion. I get questions all the time, like, does the blacklist work, or does Inktip work? Which contests should I enter? I've tried pretty much every marketing channel available to screenwriters, and I'm going to give you my unfiltered opinion on each one and tell you which ones work and which ones don't. And I promise I won't spend a lot of time pitching my own services. The whole webinar will be about 2 hours long, and less than 5 minutes of it will be pitching my services. So don't get too worried about that. So if you're interested in attending this webinar, it's going to be December 9th, Wednesday, December 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Don't worry if you can't actually attend the live webinar. I record these webinars and then I do send them out later. So you can, if you sign up, you'll be on the list and you will get an email later on telling you the link so that you can listen to the webinar, the recorded webinar later on. Anyways, as I said, December 9th, Wednesday, December 9th, 10 a.m. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/free webinar. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplay.com/free webinar to sign up. Again, even if you can't sign up, don't worry about it. Just sign up anyways, and then I will email you a link after the webinar with the recording. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing Trey Nelson. Here is the interview. Welcome, Trey, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ashley.
So to start out, maybe you can just give us a little bit of information about your background. How did you get started in the entertainment industry?
Sure. I got started a little bit late, although film, always has inspired me from, the age of 13 years old when I first saw Pee-wee's Big Adventure on the big screen. But I didn't get really started into the nuts and bolts of filmmaking until I was 25, and that was after a short career in the corporate world. I worked for Gap Incorporated for 3 years, and then left that and did some traveling, and then came to New York City and started out working in the independent film industry in New York as a PA, and have been doing that for the past 15 years in New York and now LA and all over the world.
Okay. So let's dig into some of the specifics of that. So you get to New York. How did you find that first PA job?
I don't even know if I would consider it a job. It's sort of like volunteer work. I don't even think I was paid. That was like 2001. And I think, I didn't really know anybody in the industry when I started out. I maybe knew a guy who AD'd on Law and Order, and asked Keith Maitland, who used to be on one of the ADs on Law and Order. I think he was a key PA or an AD, and I begged him to get me a PA job on Law and Order that entire summer, and I finally got one day, and then was fired. I wasn't the best PA, just put it that way. I was a better storyteller than I was at that stuff. But it's really important for people who want to learn the craft of filmmaking to start at the bottom. I don't think it really does you any justice to skip any of the hoops that you have to jump through.
Yeah. Okay, so you're working as a PA. I notice on IMDb you have a couple of, early in your career, some shorts that you did, and then you started to direct some television. So maybe take us through those shorts that you wrote and directed, and kind of tell us how you produced those, how you got those made, and ultimately if they helped you with your career, or if you get film festivals, just anything you can tell us about them.
Sure, absolutely. So while I was working in independent film, I knew that I needed to not just sort of experience the filmmaking process vicariously through the filmmakers that I was working for, but I also knew that I needed to write and I needed to shoot some stuff. So I wrote a short film called Maybe Means No. It wasn't particularly good, but it was important to start that process, to take that first step. And I think that's important for any filmmaker, to just sort of do it. Just do it. Don't be afraid, but do it. Then in 2004, I came across a book called Water of an Undetermined Depth, and it's by Richard Chiappone. And there's a short story in that book called Raccoon. And I called up Rich, and I said, listen, I want to adapt this into a short story or a short film. So he was fine with it. I adapted the short story into a script, and I raised about $40,000 for that short film, and we shot it in upstate New York in the winter of 2004. And I was lucky. I had two great actors on it. I had Jonathan Togo, who you might know from CSI Miami. He was on it. This was before he was on CSI Miami, and he was just sort of a theater actor in New York. I think he had done some other films, and then so I made that film, and that film was a great success in terms of it was like a true expression of what kind of filmmaker I knew I wanted to be. It was drama, it had action, it had thrill, and it was just visually very strong film. And I submitted to a bunch of festivals, didn't get into really any of the, Sundance or anything like that, but I did get it into the Aspen Shorts Fest. And that was just, luck. I didn't know anybody. I submitted it, and it got in. And then from there, it went on to a bunch of other film festivals. And it was really my calling card for many years as a filmmaker. And it was also when investors were going to invest in Lost in the Sun, they looked at that short film, which, what was funny about it was that I had made it nearly 9 years prior to making Lost in the Sun. So I was a much different filmmaker 9 years later and had a lot more experience.
Okay, let me just dig into a couple things that you just said. So the short you're talking about that you think was success, that was called Raccoon?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the book rights, because I get this question a lot from writers. They find a short story or even a novel, and they're like, hey, how do I go about acquiring the rights? I mean, you just said, hey, I called Rich up, as if this was somebody you knew personally. Is that the case?
No.
Okay, so take us through that process of actually calling this author up. I mean, you read this short story, you think it would make a great short film, but how do you pitch yourself? I mean, there's no money in it for him, so how do you really pitch, yourself that he's willing to sign away the rights, the movie rights to this short film, this short story he wrote?
Yeah, I mean, Ashley, I think it's really important for any young filmmaker out there to acknowledge the fact that everybody has a story to tell, and even writers, in some writers, you might get lucky, want to see their stories made into films, and you have to appeal to their ego, okay? And but also you have to have the confidence to say to this person that I'm going to do your story justice. So those are two things that are really important. The other thing is just it can't hurt to ask, right? Mm-hmm. You need to ask, otherwise you won't get an answer. So if there's a story out there, like say a couple months ago I read a story in the New Yorker, and I was like, you know what, I'm working a lot right now. I do commercials and some television, but sometimes you just want to make something that's creative and wonderful, and maybe it needs to be abstract because you're an artist and you want to experiment with something. And there was a story in the New Yorker, and I was like, heck, you know what? I'm gonna try to find out who this reps this writer, or if there's a way that I could reach this writer directly. And you do research online, you email them, maybe you get an answer, maybe you don't, maybe they put you in touch with their agent, maybe you get lucky and the agent, for the most part, short stories, there's no money in it for anybody. So you're doing it for art's sake. So I think it's a great way for any sort of filmmaker who's just starting out to if they can't find it in themselves to write something that comes from them, there's no shame in going out there and adapting something and creating it and making it their own in the world of the moving picture.
Yeah. I had a friend recently, and I'd be curious to get your take on this. Maybe he just wasn't persistent enough, but it was a similar situation. He found a short. He wanted to adapt it. When he contacted the writer just said, yeah, talk to my agent. And, this friend of mine who's a writer, he was willing to give him a couple $1,000s, for the rights. But it was like, I mean, as you say, there's no money in shorts. And what the problem he found was the agent there was no, so what the agent gets 10%, $200. And it was such a minuscule amount of money for the agent that the agent just basically wasn't willing to even bother dealing with my friend. And I'm just curious what you would say. Do you just move on to another project in those cases? How did you actually get to Rich and not his agent?
Well, I actually had to go through Rich's agent, but I got to Rich first. And I think if you can get the writer, because at the end of the day, the agent's not going to make that decision. The writer's going to make the decision, because it's, you need to get to the writer, and you need to make sure the writer believes in your vision. That's the first thing. Then you'll have to go through the agent if they have an agent. I mean, that's just part of the business. But I am a firm believer in if you accept the first answer and the first answer is no, then shame on you. You need to ask again. There's so many doors that have been slammed in so many creative persons' faces. And if you walked away on the first door slamming in your face, you're not going to be very successful in this business. This business is about perseverance. And there's a lot of people out there who want to make movies, and generally the ones who are successful are the ones who don't take no for an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I also believe that in asking for forgiveness rather than asking for permission in some cases. At the end of the day, you need to get the rights properly, but getting those rights and getting a writer behind your vision is really important.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a bit about, you said you raised $40,000 for this short. I mean, for a short film, that's a pretty decent budget. So maybe you can just walk us through the steps. Exactly how did you go about raising that money?
Well, half of it was mine that I put on credit cards.
Okay.
And the other half was, this was back in the day when you couldn't do online fundraising. So I wrote letters to friends and family, and I pieced together, $100 donations, $500 donations here and there, and scraped together another $20,000. It's not easy, but the one thing that's important in the process of filmmaking is that you're always going to be asking for money, and you better get used to it. Because getting people to buy into your vision is the first skill that you need in filmmaking. Mm-hmm. If you cannot sell yourself and you cannot sell your vision, then you're going to have a hard time making your film. And it takes a while to get good at that. It took me a while to get good at that, and it's a lot of it. I would say to filmmakers, don't get hung up on being the auteur filmmaker who's got their short film into Sundance, and that's all they've done in 5 years. That's a waste of your time. You've made one short film in 5 years. That's not learning the craft of filmmaking, and that's not learning the craft of storytelling. I suggest to young filmmakers out there, work. All you need to do is work. No matter what it is, you could be PAing, you could be ADing, you could be APing, you could be production managing. You could, in some cases, you'd be directing, but just do it. Mm-hmm. But sitting around and crossing your fingers and hoping that, quite frankly, a system that is not built in your favor, but a system that is built in the favor of people who have connections, is not the way to go. Go out there and make stuff. Because if you're making stuff, then you're doing something and you're telling your story, and it's a lot healthier than sitting around and twiddling your thumbs.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about your transition from you have your short film Raccoon, got into a bunch of festivals, so you're doing well with that. And let's talk about that transition now to becoming a professional director. You mentioned commercials. You've got a bunch of credits on IMDb for directing TV. So just take us through that process. Did you get an agent from Raccoon? Were you able to land an agent? How did you get those first actual paid professional directing gigs?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was making Raccoon, I was actually I was a production assistant on a show on Bravo called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. Do you remember that show?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So I was a production assistant on that show, and I made a lot of contacts on that show. And some of those people went on to make other television shows that were being made in New York at that time. And this was in the mid-aughts in New York City, and when reality television was, just sort of getting its feet under it, and a lot of it was being made for not a lot of money. So there was a lot of opportunity for young directors to get an opportunity to direct, and that's what I did. And there's somewhere like between 8 or 9 years between the time that I made Raccoon and when I made Lost in the Sun. And in those 8 or 9 years, I had two kids, and I needed to work because I had to pay for 2 kids and live in New York City. So I built a reputation as someone who was a very hard worker, but also, I tried to take jobs that meant something to me, and try to take jobs that I was passionate about. And I did reality television. And then that led to actually directing. I've directed 4 feature-length documentaries as well. Mm-hmm. and that led to directing commercials, because it starts building on itself because people start trusting you. It's hard to get people to trust you with their money, but if you have a resume and a reel and you can build on that and your work keeps getting better and better, then people will start trusting you more.
But there's a big leap between, PA and directing an episode. So maybe just take us through some actual logistics of what did you actually do? Did you bring in your first short film and say, hey, this is what I can do? How did you actually land those jobs?
So one of the line producers on Queer Eye for the Straight Guy's name is Jerry Colbert. He became a showrunner on a television show for VH1 called The Agency. And The Agency was a reality television show about the Wilhelmina Modeling Agency. And Jerry knew about Raccoon, the short film, and I showed it to him, and I said, listen, I really want to direct. And he said, okay, well, I'll give you an associate producer job on this agency show. And I did it, and then whenever there was an opportunity to direct anything, because a field producer wasn't around, I would go out and direct something. And then what I did was I went into the edit room, I grabbed the clips that I had directed, and I cut something together, and I showed it to the next person. And then the next person hired me, and the next person that hired me was Matt Ginsberg, who is now an executive at History Channel. And Matt hired me for a show called Ink, which was a reality television show about a tattoo parlor in Las Vegas. And I lived in Las Vegas, and I was a director. There's two directors, Max Landis and me. Got married in 2005, and right after I got married, I went out to Las Vegas and lived in Las Vegas for 4 months and directed a television show. And it's those sacrifices that you have to make, and it's that push that you have to do to make that leap. You have to make sure people know what you want, because if you don't tell them what you want, then they're not going to know. You also have to make something good, and if you make something good, people will trust you, and you got to get it into their hands. But the only way to be in that position is to maybe take work that, you think that may not be where you're at in your head as a creative person, but it's where you're at in reality. And if you keep pushing, then you'll get those breaks. You earn those breaks. You earn that luck.
Okay, that's very sound advice. Sounds like just small baby steps. Slowly you got to the point where you could actually direct. So let's dig into Lost in the Sun, starring Josh Duhamel. I just watched the film. I really enjoyed it. So well done on that front. I just want to get a quick log line. If people haven't seen the trailer or seen the movie yet, maybe you can just pitch us. I always link to the trailer in the show notes so people can find that. But maybe you can just start out by giving us a quick log line of the film.
Sure. It's a story of a career criminal who kidnaps a newly orphaned teenager and ends up using him to rob convenience stores and banks throughout Texas and New Mexico. Okay,
perfect. So where did this story idea come from?
So soon after I quit that corporate job in California, I went hiking through Central America. And while I was in Central America backpacking and hiking, I was attacked by a pack of wild dogs. And it sounds like a movie, but it was a bad movie.
Now you said attacked by wild thugs?
Wild dogs, animals.
Oh, wild dogs. Oh, okay, wow.
So I came back to the United States to get rabies treatment because that's where I needed to get it, and that's where I chose to get it. So when I was in the United States getting my rabies treatment, it takes a while to get the shots and to see if you're healthy and stuff. So while I was waiting, I rented a car and I drove throughout New Mexico and Arizona and West Texas. And that's really where the idea of the film came to me. It was during that time of healing. And I didn't really start writing it until 2006, and that was when I was just starting to work a lot as a director in film and television, mostly television, and it took me a while to write. I would say I wasn't really done with it until 2009, 2010, and it kept changing even after Josh Duhamel got attached to it. But that's really where it started, and it took me a while to write it, mainly because I was working. I was directing, so in between my free time, I was trying to finish the script.
Yeah. So I always like to just ask this question of writers: what came first with this? I mean, this is a kind of a character study about this guy and the boy. What came first? Was it the character, or was it the story? The idea of sort of two guys running around the Southwest robbing convenience stores, or was it just this character?
That's a great question. I think it's funny, like all of my stories start with a tone and a space and a place. And that's how my brain thinks. I think very visually. I don't think in terms of characters. So when I get the space and the place and I get an idea of what that space and place is, then I occupy it with characters and what kind of characters I want in it. And then after I've got those characters, then the structure of the story starts forming. So I would say character came first, after kind of knowing what the space and the place was.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so take us through sort of the steps. You've written this script now. It took you a few years. You're working full time. Take us through the steps of once you have a finished script that you feel good about. What do you start to do with it? Obviously at this point you probably have a lot of contacts in the TV industry, but just start taking us through that process of you've got a finished script and now you want to try and get it produced.
Sure. So I've got a finished script, and I tried to find a production company to help me get this thing made, and I was working with a production company in New York by the name of Atlantic Pictures and Chris Marsh. And Chris Marsh went to the same college that I went to in upstate New York, and I was put in touch with him. And Chris had a film that went to Sundance, I believe, in 2011. And did very well. And the sales agent on that film was ICM, and ICM asked Chris for other scripts that they were interested in making. So they passed along Lost in the Sun to ICM, and they gave us a list of actors that were on it. And at that time, Paul Schnee, who was one of the casting directors on Lost in the Sun, was a friend of mine from New York, just from working in New York City, and he looked at the list and he said, "Listen, I think Josh would be great for this role, and I think it'd be something that he'd probably want to do because he hasn't done anything like this." So we offered the script to Josh. Josh read it, and then I came out to LA and we met. And in 2011, Josh, verbally attached himself to the script, and we tried to raise the money. For 2 years, we tried to raise the money, and we couldn't do it. We just couldn't find the financing.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. Did he sign a letter of intent, and there was no pay or play deal? Like, just he liked the script enough to just get on board without any kind of. He just gave me a verbal. He just gave me a verbal, like, listen, I want to make this movie with you, and and his agent was on board with it, and everybody else was sort of on board with it. So it was at that point, we could go out and try to raise the funds for the film with, his verbal attachment to it. Now, if there was an investor who wanted a letter of intent, then we'd get the letter of intent from Josh's agent as well. And we ended up doing that. But that came later because we had such a hard time raising money for the film. We didn't actually Atlantic Pictures fell out of the picture, and then
Clay Florin and Amy Shea came into the picture very serendipitously. In 2013, I got an email from Amy saying basically that she had a film that was going to be at South by Southwest. So I sent her the script, and she had read the script, I want to say like 2 or 3 years ago, and she reread it. She was like, listen, I love this script. And I basically we agreed that we would try to get this film made. And she came, and Clay came along, and they brought an investor in 2013, like in August of 2013, they brought an investor and by the name of Clay Pecorin, and he came in with most of the money for the film, and we were shooting by January of 2014.
Okay, great. So how can people see Lost in the Sun? Do you have the release schedule? Do you know when it's going to be released, video on demand in theaters?
Yeah, it's going to be released November 6th, VOD, and then I think it's going to be in 4 markets theatrically. It's going to be in New York, Dallas, where I'm from, Minneapolis, and Los Angeles.
Okay, perfect. And I always just like to round out the interviews by asking the guest to tell us maybe if people want to follow you or contact you, what's the best way to do that? Anything you feel comfortable sharing, maybe a Twitter handle or Facebook page if you have a blog, something like that. And I round all this up and put it in the show notes. But any way for people to just follow and kind of keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, they could. I'm on Instagram at Trey Nelson _. They could follow me there. I have a Twitter handle that's Trey Nelson _, but I'm not a big Twitter guy. Facebook is mostly my personal stuff. So if they want to reach me, Instagram's the best way to do it.
Okay, perfect. And I assume Lost in the Sun probably has a Twitter page and a Facebook page as well.
Lost in the Sun has a great Facebook page. They've got a Twitter page and an Instagram page. So I think the Twitter handle is @LitsMovie, and I think if you just search Lost in the Sun on Facebook, you could like it.
Yeah, perfect. Great. Well, Trey, this has been a very enlightening interview. Lots of great information. So I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me.
Absolutely, man. It was nice meeting you.
You too. And good luck with the film.
Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Bye.
I just want to mention 2 things we're doing at Selling Your Screenplay to help screenwriters find producers who are looking for material. First, we've created a monthly newsletter that will be sent directly to producers. Every member of SYS Select can now submit 1 logline per newsletter. I went and emailed my large database of producers and asked them if they would like to receive this monthly newsletter of pitches. So far, we have about 170 producers who have signed up to receive it. These producers are hungry for material and happy to read scripts from writers. They've specifically said they're looking for material, and they specifically said they want pitches from Selling Your Screenplay writers. So if you want to participate in this pitch newsletter and get your script into the hands of lots of producers, sign up at sellingyourscreenplay.com/select. And secondly, we've partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads sites, so we can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, we've been getting 10 to 12 high-quality paid leads per week. These are producers and production companies who are actively looking to buy material or looking to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for specific type of spec scripts to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their own ideas. We have shorts, features, producers looking for TV and web series pilots. It's a huge array of different types of projects. And these leads are exclusive to our partner and to SYS Select members. To sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplay.com. To sign up, go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. I recently set up a success stories page for people who have had success through the various SYS Select services. So if you want to check out what some of the other people who have tried the SYS services are saying, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. Again, just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/success. And I've listed a whole bunch of people with quotes who have used our services and had some success with them. Also, if you've had some success with SYS Select services, please do let me know. It's inspiring to hear these stories. So I'd love to share your story either on the success page or even in a podcast interview. So again, just send me an email if you've had some success with any of the SYS Select services. I know I don't catch everybody. I know there's people out there that have had success and I haven't necessarily gotten in touch with you. In the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing Alistair Legrand and Luke Harvis, who recently wrote a horror film called The Diabolical. I was supposed to actually interview them for today's episode, but Trey Nelson's film is actually coming out before Alistair and Luke's, so those two episodes got flip-flopped. So that will be the next episode. Actually, I take that back. The next episode is the special 100th episode, and then episode number 101 will be Alistair Legrand and Luke Harvis. So next week, keep an eye out. I'm going to be answering a whole bunch of questions that people have sent in through by listening to the podcast. Whole bunch of questions we're going to go through and answer for the special 100th episode. And then in addition, I'm just going to talk about sort of some of the highlights from 100 episodes. I've interviewed all these people, and I'm going to try and boil down some of the lessons that I've learned, and just kind of maybe guide you through some of the episodes and highlight some of the what I consider to be important episodes that I've done. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. It's a special 100th episode. To wrap things up, I just want to touch on a few things from today's episode with Trey. The big takeaway for me is a takeaway that I get from a lot of the podcast episodes that I do. I love how Trey just went out there and made things happen for himself. He was working in the industry and just went out and optioned the rights to a short, went and made short films. I would really encourage you to look him up on IMDb. When you listen to this guy's story, it was more about doing the work and slowly advancing than ever having that earth-shattering moment where you, quote, break in. There's not a lot of luck in his story. It was just a lot of hard work and small incremental improvements. His story is not like an overnight rags to riches, super inspirational story. I think people get kind of hung up on those stories, but his story is exactly what could actually work for a lot of people. I get so many emails, from people that, hey, can you get me in touch with this producer? Can you get me an agent? Can you get me a manager? And I just feel like those people are looking for that big sort of earth-shattering moment. They're putting their emphasis on the moment. This agent signs me. This producer buys my script, and that's going to launch me into the top-level screenwriting assignments. And I suppose that does happen for a small number of people, but I think Trey's story is a much more realistic approach. As I said, it's not the super sexy, overnight success. This, Harvey Weinstein buys your script and turns it into a movie and you're the talk of the town. Those are the kinds of stories that catch our attention, but those are the minority of successes. Trey's story is exactly what can actually work. I've mentioned this several times on the podcast. I wrote a blog post where I went and I tallied up how everyone who has appeared on my podcast, how they broke into the industry. The number one way by a landslide was networking, and the subcategory under networking was working low-level jobs and working your way up in the industry. So Trey was doing that. But another way to break into the industry, totally separate, was doing short films, doing independent feature films, and advancing your career on your own. Trey was also doing that too. He was working both angles. And that's what's so important to consider. These things have a way of building on each other, snowballing. He was making industry connections through his day job, but he was also out there on weekends and nights shooting short films. And that's the key, is he got some synergy there. He had the connections to show these short films too, and those are impressive. One would not have worked without the other in his case, I don't think. It's you can be working in the industry and say, yeah, I'm a director, I want to be a writer, I want to be a director, and you have all these connections. But if you haven't actually written something and actually, as a director, actually directed something, I don't know how seriously they're going to take you. I mean, everybody working in the entertainment industry wants to be a writer or a director or a producer. Everybody wants to get to that top level. So actually having some stuff that people can watch and see, I think is essential. And as I said, he was working both of these angles. Keep in mind too, these production jobs that he's talking about, from PA all the way up, working these television production jobs. They're incredibly labor intensive. You work grueling hours, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. So it would have been very easy for him to just go home from work and say, I'm tired. You know, he could have rationalized to himself, well, I'm working in the industry, I'm building my Rolodex, and that's enough. But he didn't. He continued to do his own stuff. He continued to make stuff on the weekends. And now what has happened, he's writing and directing a movie with Josh Duhamel. Anyway, I hope that resonates with some of the people who are listening to this. There really is no limit to how many things you can and should be doing to break in and get your career going. I can tell you, though, writing scripts and then sending out a few scripts to a few people, entering a few contests, and then sitting by your phone and waiting for it to ring, that's not going to cut it. So really listen to his story and what he did. Again, it's not the super sexy overnight success that sometimes people like to, get highlighted. Just some of those overnight successes are the ones we hear about. But it's the people that are just incrementally, slowly building their careers and getting better and better and doing bigger and bigger projects that I think is a much, much more realistic way for all of us to advance. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.